We will have three important panel sessions today. We will be together for 3 hours from now to onward. Um, and the main purpose of our today's SDG 16 plus forum is to discuss the the current situation of democracy and peace in Asia. As you all know that this year, um, Myanmar and Afghanistan both failed the people of Asia, the people of Myanmar and Afghanistan, because the world was struggling for peace and democracy for the last 2 decades in both of these countries and, of course, in this region. But we have witnessed that still there are challenges, and these challenges are actually creating further challenges for the whole of world. And we have been seeing that the women and the girls in Afghanistan are facing are the most vulnerable today. They are not allowed to come out of their homes. They are not allowed to work. They are not allowed to go into the schools. And millions of people in both of these countries have lost their livelihoods. Uh, they are not being engaged by their governments in the democratic processes. And of course, the neighboring countries and the other region, particularly the whole Asia, has been facing lots of challenges. As I've shared with you that we have three sessions today, we will start with the opening session. And for the opening remarks, I would like to request Mr. Hideki, who is the chair of Asia Development Alliance and the executive director of GENIC, uh, to share with us his opening remarks. Mr. Hideki, please.
Thank you very much, Zia. My name is Hideki Wakabayashi. I'm chair of ADA and director of JANIC. Zia, you already made opening remarks already. Looks like, sounds like opening remarks, but it's my great honor to present welcome remarks on behalf of ADA Steering Committee and members in the first SDGs Plus Forum Asia, organized by ADA and its members and partners. Today, to be honest, I'm looking for a word, but I'm very much distressed about what is happening in Asia. We are facing one of the most challenging times where the situation is getting worse, especially with regards to the human rights violation. Deteriorating status of most marginalized, vulnerable community. Millions of people are being barred from their basic freedom of expression, living in peace, access to justice, one of the worst human rights situations where the women, children, indigenous group in particular are at the receiving end. This has also caused more shrinking civic space. People's voices are being muted deliberately. Thousands of innocents have lost their lives, were forced to leave their motherlands and migrate in dangerous situation, just in hope of better lives for them and their children. Various efforts to bring peace and justice have not been successful so far yet. And every day we hear new laws, many policies being made by the hardliners for restricting our basic human rights. It is in this context that we are free trying to strengthen our global solidarity and call for peace and justice in our region by voicing their stories from the ground. I hope this forum, although very short in nature due to the pandemics, would still be able to deliberate the seriousness of the issues. Today, we call for the UN General Assembly and the UN Human Rights Council to urge the Security Council to consider all of the options it has previously used to deal with gross human rights violations, including economic and financial sanctions, arms embargoes, and travel bans, and calling for judicial actions at the International Criminal Court, ICC, or ad hoc tribunals by looking at the severity of situation in Myanmar and Afghanistan. The international media should listen to and broadcast the voices of the people, show solidarity, and recognize and support the people in these countries. I hope that by the end of this multi-stakeholder forum, we will be able to come up with a solid statement by incorporating all the suggestions and be able to release by tomorrow at the end of the Global People's Assembly. I want to thank all partners, especially GCAP and Global People's Assembly team, for accommodating our forum. I also want to thank Forus TAP Network for showing their strong solidarity with us and for their long partnership. I wish this forum a great success and look forward to hearing the important discussions. Thank you very much. Back to Dia.
Thank you very much indeed, Hideki. Now I would like to request Mr. Amitabh Bihar, who is currently working as Chief Executive Officer of Oxfam India. He remained as co-chair of Global Call to Action Against Poverty. He is the vice chair of Board of Civicus, and there are lots of other positions Mr. Amitabh is actually holding. Over to Mr. Amitabh Bihar, please.
Somebody else is speaking. Yeah. So thank you, Zia, and thank you, Hideki and Jyotsna. It's absolutely wonderful to be back with all of you. A big thank you to everyone for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be back with everyone. I know this is a short session. I would have loved to have a good long conversation with everyone, but let me try and flag some issues that hopefully can help us locate the larger conversation of democracy in our current times. But before I do that, let me just salute both the organizers for organizing the People's Assembly. I think that's remarkable. When the UN General Assembly is happening, to have a People's Assembly is, I think, a very, very important step in the right direction. And that's what we need to do. The UN must listen to the voices of people. And the second, I do want to salute the courage of Afghani women who, in spite of all the huge challenges in the last few weeks, have continued to protest and assert their rights. So a salute to them. Let me just try and, just flag 3 or 4 issues given the limitation of time. I do think, and I completely agree with Hideki, that this is a historic moment that we are in, and not necessarily brimming with optimism. So I think it's a good moment also to understand and look back at even recent history. And I just want you to take, all of us to go back to the MDGs. Many of us, I think in this group, most of us did say that these were not Millennium Development Goals, but they were minimum development goals. Because we thought that the framing was extremely problematic. It was looking at questions of extreme poverty with a narrow lens. And then came the SDGs. The civil society did want the SDGs to have a much higher bar. And I do think that we failed in that opportunity. And the Sustainable Development Goals, though hugely ambitious in many ways, is still short of the mark that we must have reached. It is still a lens of development and poverty, and does not use the lens of human rights and justice. I think that's something critical. that I just wanted to particularly highlight, that it would have been very important, and it would have been a very different framing if ensuring justice for all, ensuring human rights for all would have been at the center, would have been the fulcrum of the entire SDG framework. Let me also say that you have the 17 goals. Most of them are powerful goals, but I do still feel goal number 16, which is our conversation today, was probably the weakest amongst all. I was part of several of those conversations, and I do think that one of the problems of the framing of the SDGs was we kept saying with great excitement, and I share that excitement, that this is a first global compact which brings economic, social, and environmental together. But we missed a very important fourth stool, that was the political. So that pillar of ensuring political also as a fundamental pillar of the SDGs was critical. We missed that pass. And I think what we're looking at today is a reflection of how we were not able to incorporate the political questions into the discussions. I just also wanted to say that while the framing was happening, the world outside the ivory towers of the UN was also changing dramatically. I'm not very sure how much of that did get incorporated in the SDG. So, let me just flag one or two cases. The 2008 meltdown, the global meltdown, the recession. One could say that we see the goal number 10 precisely because of that. Otherwise, it would not have been there. And also, we saw in 2011 the Arab Spring happening and people's movement across several countries. That certainly has not been incorporated. So that's the history I just wanted to bring in, because if we are moving ahead, we will need to look at some of these questions with greater depth. What are we seeing today? We are looking at authoritarian regimes across, from east to west. And these authoritarian regimes are actually using the language of democracy and very often instruments of democracy to then move towards greater authoritarian states, towards shrinking of space for civil society, for civic action, for human rights. So that's one trend. But in all this scenario, and that story starts from Philippines to my country to Turkey, it just goes on. It's across the globe. But on the other hand, I also say that there is remarkable people's power across the world that we see. And I don't have the time, but if you just look at the stories of struggles, of spontaneous people's struggles against authoritarian regimes, at least in Asia, we can certainly celebrate what we have seen in Hong Kong last year. A remarkable people's power challenging draconian laws. So in this context, I think it is a historic moment for all of us. How do we move ahead? When I must say, I talked of the authoritarian regimes, let me just add one more thing. This is probably the biggest challenge on the post-war consensus around the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that challenge is diluting the core normative values of democracy, of inclusion, of pluralism, and of I think it's important for us to keep that at the center of this People's Assembly that we have, and try and see what can we do as people of this globe. How do we ensure a sustainable future? How do we rebuild democracies in different societies? And I have just 3 or 4 specific thoughts. I'll end with that. I know my time is almost over, but let me just give you very specific suggestions. Hopefully during the next 3 hours, we can discuss them. The first one, I think it's very, very important that we rebuild democracy. There's a huge deficit of trust in terms of democracy, particularly representative democracy. And what we are seeing is crony capitalism, obscene levels of inequality. But this is a moment where we'll need to invest in rebuilding democracy, bottom up, pretty much brick by brick. So how do we ensure citizens' dialogues, societies communicating with each other? I think that's one big piece that we need to work on. The second, I think it's very important that we need to get the whole human rights discourse out of the clutches of a technocratic approach. Not just the lawyers, every citizen, every person should be able to both understand and speak the language of human rights. It's critical, it's hard work. In patriarchal societies, in the casteist society that I live in discriminatory regimes, it's going to be difficult. But I think there's no alternative to building a human rights discourse around, built by people themselves, and not just through lawyers or the corridors of UN. And the third, and I'll end with that, is, SDG also talks of leave no one behind. Can we actually bring the last person to the center of all our conversations? It's going to be critical. Can we start reimagining democracy from the lens of the last person, be it a minority in my country, or be it the women in Afghanistan, or the most marginalized, the most excluded communities, are the ones who should be at the center of reimagining democracy, of reimagining a robust democracy where people's right, human dignity, and the rights of Mother Earth are respected. Thank you for inviting me, and all the best for the deliberations that we'll have over the next 3 hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Amitabh. And of course, Hideki, both of you have already set the strategic direction for our forthcoming sessions. And it was really nice to hear from you that we need to initiate this people-led human rights discourse. Indeed, this is much needed today. Um, since we are already, have taken 3 minutes from the panelists, I would like to start the first panel. And in this panel, we will be further assessing the SDG 16 plus situation in the whole of Asia region. We have very eminent panelists with us today. Each of the panelists will have 5 minutes, and I would request each of the panelists to share the current situation in Asia with possible solutions to restore peace and democracy, the challenges that we have been facing, and what could be the possible recommendations that are the presenters and the leaders in our opening session have already shared. Would you like to agree with them, or you would like to recommend them further? So our first panelist is Mr. Ajay Jha, who is the co-chair of major groups for other stakeholders, coordination mechanism for HLPF. He is the regional facilitator for Asia Pacific for the MGOS at UNEP, and he's also the coordinator of movement for advancement of movement for advancing understanding on sustainability and mutuality. Mr. Ajay, please, floor is yours.
Thanks, Zia. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
I'm on the cellular network, so I'm not sure whether you can hear me clearly, but yeah. Thanks for your, yeah. Thanks for your hands up. Heads up. I mean, the situation of peace, justice, and inclusive institutions in this region, we know that it's going from bad to worse. Even as we battle and we are witnessing one of the most critical phases in humanity for the last 2 years, the governments do not seem to be taking lesson, and they are going in a completely different direction. I mean, Myanmar and Afghanistan definitely are driving our imagination and our thoughts. for the people in these two countries. But why only Myanmar and Afghanistan? You look at countries in the region, China, 1 million Uyghur in the camps. You look at Philippines, you look at Hong Kong, you look at Cambodia, you look at India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Each of these countries use the pandemic to increase their crackdown on the people. And we have been witnessing what has been happening on the popular protests. Each of these countries, almost each of these countries passed the electronic control bill to muzzle any kind of democratic dissent against the measures taken by the government. So this is very, very, very sad situation. And as far as SDGs is concerned, right since the beginning, we wanted SDG 10 on inequality and SDG 16 to be the fulcrum of the architecture of the system.
SDG 16.
Yeah, but we do not have that. Now, the situation is that despite having this elaborate architecture, this architecture does not take political economy and protection of human rights upfront. And we see, even before the pandemic, we were not likely to achieve the SDGs. Asia Pacific region, we see that there is furthermore transgression on critical human rights, critical SDGs. So it seems that we might achieve poverty reduction to some extent in some of the poorest countries, but very critical challenges like climate change, human rights, peace, justice, and democracy are not being helped by the SDGs. And we have a recent report coming from the IPCC, which has very dire warning, and not that it brings anything new to us, but it definitely shows the criticality of the situation, and we might breach 1.5 degrees target a decade earlier than predicted. In 2018, we had a report which predicted that 1.5 degrees may be breached in 2040s. But this report underlines that 1.5 degrees target may be breached in the 2030s itself. So we see that our aspirations from the SDGs and 2030 agenda is not being met. And we have very recently in the HLPF, we have seen that countries desisted from taking decisive and challenging decisions. So you go to these forums, they give you a sense that, okay, we are on the right direction and we need to improve. But actually the problem is that on several areas, we are going in the completely different direction. Besides that, I would also emphasize that Asia Pacific is the only region where we don't have any regional human rights system. All the regions you see, they have regional human rights codes, but governments in this region hardly bother to take any conversation on this. And I think the people who are working on SDG 16 and other dimensions of peace, justice, and inclusive and transparent institutions should also include this call. We already have Article 1 in the Rome Statute, which kind of gives an enabling framework, and government, if at all, they can come together to have some agreement on having a regional human rights system that will add another layer of accountability to the government towards the people. So this is one call. And with regard to Myanmar and Afghanistan, I mean, the first thing is that all political detainees should be released. At least in Myanmar, the Tatmadaw should respect the elections that was held in November 2020. And even in Afghanistan, besides the restoration of the government should make sure that there is no regression of the rights of the women. So these are the few important areas that I wanted to flag. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thanks, over to you.
Thanks, Ajay. Now I would like to request Mr. Nicholas Booth, who is the Governance and Peace Building Team Leader at UNDP Regional Hub at Bangkok. Mr. Nicholas.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, you give me a very big topic and only 5 minutes, so I'm just going to say a very, very few things. First of all, I ought to say, I'm going to speak today not as I'm not going to represent the official voice of the UN, which would be a very grand thing that I'm too modest to be able to do. What I can do is reflect on what I see from my job working for UNDP in this region. So these are some personal thoughts kind of gathered from what I see around me, and particularly from Myanmar and Afghanistan, which of course has been taking up most of my time this year. Well, I think some of the things that I've learned this year, if I didn't already know them, I mean, we have to be very realistic. The commitment of member states to democracy promotion is a little bit uneven. We have a number of member states which demonstrably place concerns around stability and geopolitics ahead of democracy. And even some states, I mean, some states don't even profess to make a normative commitment to democracy, really, and others, even if they do, we see that their national and geopolitical interests are sometimes allowed to get in the way first. And I think that we can see both in Myanmar and Afghanistan that both those countries have been affected by that. And that some of these countries that I'm talking about have vetoes on the Security Council. So we have to be realistic about the limits of the power of the UN right now, especially in relation to the Security Council. And of course, particularly when I think about Myanmar, we are also reminded of the limitations at the moment on ASEAN. So ASEAN has commitments to democracy and the rule of law, but it also has principles of non-interference, and they're still winning out. I will say, I detect a little bit of a slight positive change, might be putting it too strongly, but the cracks are slightly being perhaps showing. This year, in relation to Myanmar, we certainly have seen the principle of non-interference prevailing, and certainly ASEAN has would have more power perhaps to influence Myanmar than any other body if it chose. But we have seen some ASEAN member states really taking a more public and a stronger stance. They haven't yet carried the consensus of ASEAN with them, but I do see it. I see Myanmar as beginning to test that, and perhaps we will see ASEAN evolve if we were to see one possible positive change in the future. Of course, you know, I mean, the UN Secretariat and the UN agencies, you know, they have an important role. The Secretary General's call for action on human rights is a very important one. The role that OHCHR plays is a very important one. We in UNDP have a slightly different role. We leave that advocacy role to those agencies. We work inside and with countries. And so we have important lessons to learn too. Let's take Myanmar. I think we have to recognize that one of the factors behind the events in Myanmar was some of the fault lines inside the country, and in particular, kind of a deep-rooted ethnic discrimination within the country, you know, that prevented the country from ever really being fully unified as a country and had stopped it from ever reaching peace. And that even under the previous government, the peace process didn't move forward as it should have done. And that created a fault line, which I think the military authorities were able to exploit. We all know about this, about the principle of divide and rule. And the fact is that if the country as a whole had stood in solidarity with the Rohingya, if there were not some of the issues of lack of ethnic understanding inside the country, and the people had been more unified in solidarity, I think perhaps the military authorities would have had less power to act in the way that they did. And certainly for us in UNDP, it's we see a moment of opportunity in Myanmar, that there is now the beginning of an understanding of greater solidarity between different ethnic groups and a greater understanding of the need for solidarity than we have seen before. And we think that's something that really needs to be built upon, because only through a commitment to human rights and solidarity between all ethnicities and religious groups can we really get the political power that comes from people will actually change things. And I think that's really at the root of my message. I was asked to make recommendations. Ultimately, we shouldn't rely on countries to espouse democracy. All the important changes in democracy have all come from social movements and popular power. And in my lifetime, I saw what the strength of social movements, for example, in my youth, the disengagement with South Africa during its apartheid period, I saw that the power that had in bringing democracy finally to that country. And I wonder, whether things might have been different, for example, here, if in Myanmar, for example, would things have been different if, or would things be different even now, if people in Thailand, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in all the neighboring countries were speaking out loudly and putting pressure on their own governments to act? What else is going to make these governments act in a way which doesn't put their other geopolitical interests first, unless the people force them to do it? So, since this meeting has been organized by Global Civil Society, I think my recommendations are really two. First of all, really to see what you can do at national level to strengthen social movements for solidarity with those in other countries who face denial of their human rights, discrimination, and oppression. And secondly, to really embrace the business and human rights agenda. I can remember a few years ago that civil society tended to regard businesses sort of uniformly as the enemy, but the picture is more complicated than that. And we have to recognize that, again, if we had succeeded in getting all businesses to disengage from Myanmar, that would be perhaps the most powerful action that anyone could take. And what we see is a mixed picture. We see some responsible action from some businesses, and of course we see the opposite. And the picture, the business and human rights agenda is picking up a lot of traction. And we have many examples in history about how civil society putting strong pressure on business to respect business and human rights ultimately affects the purse strings of countries. And that is certainly something that gets authoritarian regimes to act. So my second recommendation would really be for global civil society to very strongly embrace the business and human rights agenda, to make common cause with those parts of the business sector that are in line with that agenda, and put a lot of pressure on those who aren't. Thanks very much. I think I used up my 5 minutes, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for highlighting this business and human rights agenda. Of course, this is really very important. I would now request Mr. Ricardo Messiano, who is the Sustainable Development Officer at UNESCAP. Mr. Ricardo, please.
So, very good morning, good afternoon again to all of you from Bangkok. My name is Ricardo Messiano, and my role within UNESCAP is to be sure that our countries in the region can have the possibility to share their progress on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in Asia and the Pacific. The main flagship event is the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development that we organize every year in March in Bangkok or online. In the specific today, I've been asked to talk a little bit about data, and in particular on reflecting on SDG 16. So what's happening in terms of data implementation and progress of the goal. I hope you can see my screen. I have a few slides that might help us navigate a little bit through the SDG 16. Some of you already mentioned it. Probably SDG 16, it is really the most important goal of them all. When we talk about peace, justice, institution, what is more important for our society, and what is more important of the progress that we can make on these goals. And that's why we like to refer to the SDG 16 as the enabler for achieving the 2030 agenda as a whole. If progress on SDG 16 are not at pace, are not fast enough, achieving the different other SDGs is just a Titanic in behavior. What happened is that COVID-19 pandemic stroke, and unfortunately progress, like on all the other goals, also on SDG 16 somehow stalled. And the other thing that we'd like to just spot the light is the fact that data for what concerns SDG 16 are unfortunately not available at the regional level. You might all know, and this is no news, that the progress in Asia and the Pacific for the SDGs are not as good as we would expect. As you can see from the slide, we should be at somewhere in 2020, 2021. We're not there for a few goals. Unfortunately, there was a regression. There is a regression, mainly for 13, 14. And for some goals, unfortunately, SDG 16, we have a very huge lack of data. So data is not available. For SDG 16, in particular, progress in Asia and the Pacific, we have some targets that make us be optimistic, like intentional homicides, National Human Rights Institution, but unfortunately, we experience a regression for a few targets like 16.3.2, unsentenced detainees, and 16.6.1, government expenditures. What does this tell us? That the goal is not really advancing in the region, and why we have different progress in the ESCAPs in Asia and the Pacific region. So, for example, in South Asia and East Asia, the performance is showing some even limited improvement. Elsewhere in the region, this is not happening, and especially voice and accountability raise some concerns. As I was telling you, with COVID, the situation didn't improve. The data and reports from frontline workers tell us that the violence against women and girls, family violence, as identified, disruption to child protection and response services are very severe, and when we get to civil registration and legal identity, deficiencies have been exacerbated. So COVID didn't help, and with, as you can see from this slide, the serious lack of data when it gets to SDG 16, as you can see, for a few indicators, we don't even have data. Situation is not rosy, and we need to work together at the regional level to, and this is probably my first recommendation, to improve and strengthen national capacities for data collection and analysis. We have no data. There is nothing to report on, and so many issues and elements are just under the radar. And for whatever data we have, we need to improve the quality and availability. ESCAP works in particular on. Yeah,
you please
I'm concluding. ESCAP works in a couple of areas to improve statistics for CRVS and illicit financial flows. And as I was telling you, we will have the occasion of discussing all these at the forthcoming Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development next year in March, where we will have a few goals, as you can see, under deep review, but we will have discussion on all different goals. So I would say thank you again for giving me the chance of discussing with you, and happy to answer to any question that might arise from the audience. Thank you so much, and over.
Thank you, Ricardo. We will have 10 minutes question answer session afterwards. we finished with all the speakers. Now let me introduce Mr. Philip Alston, who is the former special reporter on extreme poverty and human rights for 2 terms, and he also remained special reporter on extrajudicial executions. Today he was invited, but he's not here in person. I would request Joycna to play his recorded message. Joycna, please. Joycna, are you playing Philip's message?
It's up on screen, but there's no sound.
Joycna, I think it's some technical issue.
There's a note from Nick Booth.
By the time we are, may I request Deirdre? Sorry?
I was just saying, when you share screen, there's a little box in the left-hand corner saying share sound. You have to tick that box before you share the screen.
Joycna, please, can you update on this?
I would say, Zia, let's go ahead with the other participants.
Okay.
And then I can play it later after the 2 speeches by Deirdre and John.
Right. So now let me Deirdre Di Burka, who is the advocacy coordinator of Forest International, to share her thoughts. Deirdre, please.
Thank you very much, Zia, and thank you to all the organisers of this event, and particularly to the Asia Development Alliance, which invited us to input into this session. And obviously, Forus is a global civil society network. So what we're going to try to provide briefly now is a global perspective on the implementation of SDG 16+ in the Asia region. Could I ask my colleague Laura to just share my presentation on the screen. Thanks very much. So first slide, please, Laura. So basically, just to introduce Forus, we're a global civil society network. Our members include 69 national development platforms and 7 regional coalitions. And of course, ADA is one of those coalitions. And really impressed to see this regional forum being organized today as part of the Global People's Assembly. And I think some very important points have been made already about the situation regarding the implementation of SDG 16+ in the region. So the fall of Myanmar, as we would see it, and we're just going to focus because we were asked for today on particularly on issues of Myanmar and Afghanistan. But the fall of Myanmar to military rule this year and of Afghanistan to the Taliban represent a major blow, as far as we see it, not only to democracy, but also to the entire peace process in Southeast and South Asia in 2021. Next slide, please, Laura. So why is SDG 16 relevant to the region? Well, as we know, SDG 16+, which goes beyond just the SDG 16 itself, but looks at its interrelationship and interconnection with other SDGs. But the goal itself focuses on promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, providing access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions on all levels. And I think as a global network, it's important to say that when we look across all regions and of the world where our members are active, we don't see any region that has achieved the effective implementation of SDG 16+. So that's important to say, that every region has its challenges, every region has quite a distance to go in terms of achieving it. But today we're looking at Asia. And this SDG is important because it provides a roadmap for all regions, for all countries, for peaceful, just and inclusive societies. And therefore, as previous speakers have said, it's a catalyst for the attainment of all SDGs. So SDG 16, as we've said already, should not be seen in isolation. It has strong links with other goals in line with the integrated and indivisible nature of the agenda. And we think it's very important when speaking about peace that a deeper positive peace includes changes in the attitudes of conflicting parties and the transformation of what we'd call the systemic and structural elements that form part of the reasons why the tensions that are present in every society spill over and become violent. And again, we think that's really important because in the context of this Global People's Assembly, we've been talking a lot about the opportunity that exists at the moment for systemic and structural change. And it is important to look at the economic. So it is very important to look at the economic and social factors that underlie a lot of the conflict and maybe violence in every region. So the need to address the root causes of conflict and to tackle economic and social inequalities and exclusion, to strengthen good and inclusive governance, and to fight against all forms of discrimination, and to forge unity in diversity through democratic practices and mechanisms is imperative if peace, justice, and good governance is to be achieved. Next slide, please, Laura. So as I said today, we'd like to congratulate ADA on leading the first SDG 16 forum in Asia. It's being organized by ADA and its national, regional and global partners. And this forum today is about really bringing voices together to reiterate our shared belief in inclusive institutions, a just society, and to embrace of democratic values. And that is very important. And some of the speakers yesterday in the opening plenary highlighted the role of civil society in promoting ethics, values and positions. And by coming together like this, I think globally and regionally, we help to reinforce our shared beliefs in these values, in these principles, and start to think about how we can make them a reality. So there is a need for us, would believe, for such a forum, for this SDG 16+ forum to be held in Asia and in other regions on an annual basis. And we believe there's a key role for civil society to monitor and report on progress with the implementation of SDG 16+ across the region. Now, Ricardo, the previous speaker, talked about the data gaps, and that's a real issue for the monitoring and reporting of progress with the implementation of SDG 16+. But there's a lot that can be done, and I know ADA and ourselves have talked about organising national and regional workshops, and I know ADA has done some of these workshops already to help civil society organizations and grassroots organizations to start to develop indicators where there are no indicators, to start developing indicators and identifying key data sets for monitoring SDG 16+ implementation. So we do need to develop new SDG 16+ indicators to allow for the more effective monitoring and tracking of progress in the region with the development of, or towards the development of peaceful, just and inclusive societies. And just to say that ADA and Forest have already collaborated last year on an SDG 16 report, and one of the annexes to that report contains a range of different indicators produced by ADA and its members linked to SDG 16. They were very imaginative, some of them, and I think it's this kind of work that civil society can do from the bottom up to actually identify the indicators and the key data sets that we can use to monitor this SDG 16 more effectively. Next slide, please, Laura. So what are the key recommendations from Forest today? And just to say, these are global level recommendations. So I'll do them very quickly. See, I know I'm probably at my time. So firstly, we believe the international peace architecture is unable to meet the security challenges of today. And we do support the meaning reform to the international peace architecture as articulated in our common agenda that was recently published by the UN Secretary General. We also are calling for a united and coordinated international approach to dealing with issues like Afghanistan and Myanmar. We believe that national governments, UN institutions, international donors, and global civil society must unite for the causes of peace, protection of human rights and democracy. I'm really struck by the point that was raised about there not being a regional human rights mechanism in Asia. A previous speaker mentioned this, and perhaps this is something that civil society should be strongly advocating for also. So realizing all human rights. So again, that's a call that we would really support, that in order to establish true peace and human security globally, governments must ensure the realization of all human rights. And those are enshrined in the International Bill of Rights, which includes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And last slide, please, Laura. So the other recommendations are, again, avoiding militarized approaches to achieving peace. We believe that these militarized approaches, which unfortunately are the norm and sometimes supported by donors and external governments, should not be pursued by governments because they consistently exclude and undermine women's participation, protection and human rights, as well as systematically undermining opportunities for sustainable peace. We believe also that safe havens should be provided for civilians fleeing unjust rule, that world leaders and UN institutions should establish immediate access and safe havens for the millions of civilians that are fleeing unjust rule, especially those coming from Afghanistan, where there are legitimate fears about revenge killings, the violent oppression of women and other vulnerable communities. We believe there needs to be negotiation over humanitarian operations so that the UN and international community should negotiate arrangements with neighbouring countries, particularly where Afghanistan is concerned, for humanitarian operations. We believe there should be increased international financial support for SDG 16+, its implementation and monitoring. And finally, we believe there should be an annual multi-stakeholder SDG 16+ forum, as well as a civil society forum in every region, because there's a clear need for this, and that civil society itself could show leadership perhaps by trying to initiate such a forum, and certainly the support of UNESCAP and others would be really important in this regard. Thanks very much. Sorry, Zia, if I've gone over time. Back to you.
Hi, Zia, you're here. Okay. I think we have lost Zia for minutes, but no problem. Thank you so much, Deirdre, for your very nice presentation. And I really like the point that we need to have the discussion on SDG 16+ across all the regions. And this is a good beginning. We need to work with the human rights organizations in our region. And thank you for your support at the global level. That matters a lot. Now, my next speaker for this session would be Becky Malay, who is the co-chair of who is the former co-chair of GCAP. And she's again one of the founding members of FADA. So thank you, Becky, for being here. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Joshna. Good afternoon to everyone. Good evening to the others. And I'm very happy to be here and join everyone who I've been missing face to face, but happy now to be with you. Our discussion is very important at this point. SDG 16 has been suffering a huge setback even before the pandemic, but it has been worsened by the pandemic. With the advent of COVID-19, the lockdowns have imposed restrictions on the mobility of people, and the movement of people have really resulted to huge sufferings in terms of the poor and the marginalized, because they have been locked down and they have been cut from their income sources, and food security has been a problem in many cases. In India, in Bangladesh, we have heard a lot of stories of hunger occurring. In Afghanistan, it has been really bad. So I see that these restrictions on restrictions like lockdowns, although necessary for containing the spread of the disease, has really exacerbated the situation, especially in relation to basic human rights. No? So these are the things that we see. The restriction of the movement of people have also been imposed by very authoritarian regimes, like in the Philippines. Any form of protest is quelled by the Duterte forces, by the Duterte government. So yesterday, it was the anniversary of the declaration of martial law in the Philippines. So even with officially lowered lockdown restrictions, all the protests were dispersed. No? So these are things that really affect how civil society actually works. There is a real constriction in the civic space that are available to all of us. I'm not only talking about my country, but of course, special focus on Myanmar, which has been suffering for quite a while now, when the military regime actually started to take over. And we haven't heard much about the situation in Afghanistan from our colleagues, but we have been in, private conversations with them. And obviously the infringement of their rights and the uncertainty of the situation, especially of women under the government of the Taliban, still is an SDG 16 issue. So I'd like to go straight to the recommendations because so many have already been outlined in the previous presentation, so I don't want to repeat. But I'd like to focus on two things, and that is a strong, let's build a strong United Nations system, because I think it's we, the people, who should be working together. We should really redesign the UN system in such a way that strong multilateralism is actually based on international solidarity. So it's both principles of strong governments and strong states, but backed up strongly by people's solidarity and people's inputs. So this is the whole essence of the People's Assembly that have been going on since 2019. No? So we really want the voices of the people to come out, but we also want to build strong solidarity ties with all of us, so that civil society is not restricted, and that civil society is actually strengthened by other civil societies from different countries. Regionally, that is most needed. So, of course, national rebuilding of democracy, as Amitabh said, is very, very important, because that is the basis by which we are able to strengthen ourselves and actually show our solidarity to others. No? So these are the things that democracy, civic space, and peace and good governance are all elements of SDG 16 that have been set back for a long time, but has been worsened, as I said, by COVID. But this is also the decade of action where we can still pivot to a new beginning. Let us take advantage of the next years until 2030, because COVID has already bared all the inequalities and all the systemic barriers to the full exercise of our freedoms and democratic practices. So let's turn it around. I think it is in our, within ourselves as people, as activists, as strong civil society activists, that we will be able to build all this institutions of power again by regaining our own power. So I think that will be my message for everyone, and that will be GCAP's recommendations for your consideration. And I wish you all good health, and let's stand together, and let us support the struggle of Myanmar and Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you. My apologies for not being able to invite you because of the drop of my line. We have with us John Romano, who is the global coordinator of TAP Network. The last speaker for today's first panel discussion. Over to John. John, could you please conclude in 3 minutes, because we have already used much of our time, and we have not left with any minutes for the question and answer.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Zia, and thanks to Ada for hosting this event. Yeah, I mean, I always enjoy speaking at the end of a panel, because a lot's already been said. I don't need to cover a lot of the challenges around SDG 16+, particularly in Asia. So I'll just go straight to some of the recommendations that I was planning on coming with. I think one thing that we've talked about here and heard a lot about around SDG 16+ in general is the interlinkages between SDG 16+ and all other SDGs in the entire 2030 agenda. And I think especially in COVID-19 times where governments have been distracted by responding to the COVID-19 crisis, rightfully so. The question is, how do we get governments to see SDG 16 plus and peace and justice and accountability and inclusivity as prerequisites to achieving gains on all of the other SDGs individually and as a whole? How do we draw out the interlinkages better between SDG 16 plus and these other issues like global health or gender equality or climate justice? I think those of us that work on these issues know that these issues are intrinsically linked, but how do we make it clear to policymakers that investments in SDG 16 plus are also strong investments in other areas as well that they may also be champions around. So I think that's one of the big challenges that we as civil society really need to help governments work on going forward as well. There's a lot more on the interlinkages that I could talk about, but I'll just stop there on that point. I think also, getting governments to commit to doing more and getting them to commit really specifically and concretely, towards ambitious and urgent action on SDG 16 plus. I mean, we've talked about, the backsliding progress on SDG 16 plus in Asia and globally. We need governments now to take urgent action. I mean, that's the first point. But I think also the point is that, the SDGs are a multilateral negotiated outcome document, meaning that they're a lowest common denominator. They're the minimum ambition that governments can commit to that in a multilateral setting. So I think what we need governments to do going forward is to outline, exactly what they're doing around SDG 16 plus and the entire 2030 agenda. Be more specific, be more ambitious, that go beyond the targets that we have through the SDGs. And especially through the voluntary national reviews. I mean, we've seen the VNRs largely do, stock taking and say, tell what's the good things that are happening in a country. But I think we need to see the VNRs as an opportunity to take stock on, maybe where some of the challenges are, and then getting governments to commit to doing more through their VNRs, and then again, reporting on that in the next cycle. So there's plenty more that we could talk about in terms of how to get governments to be more concrete and ambitious. And then just, one final point is, just around civil society, how we can push back on some of the disturbing trends that we're seeing. One thing that, again, we could talk a lot more on this topic as well is on spotlight reporting. I think a lot can be said around the role of spotlight reporting or, shadow reporting for human rights mechanisms, for example, as a key accountability tool for civil society. And there's a lot of work that TAP has done around SDG 16 plus spotlight reporting that I won't go into in detail. I'll provide some links in the chat box. One of the resources that we have is the SDG 16 plus civil society toolkit that really provides some really concrete guidance on how organizations can work with SDG 16 plus, the national, local level, and really detailed guidance on spotlight reporting for SDG 16 plus. So I'll let you explore that a bit more on each of your ends. I'll put some links in the chat box, and also happy to continue the conversation through the Q&A. But I'll stop there for now, Zia, due to time limitations. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard very eminent panelists speaking on SDG 16 plus, democracy, peace, inclusive societies, justice and rule of law. You may have questions in your mind. I actually apologize because we have used most of our time in hearing our panelists. But if any of you have any pressing question, you may please raise your hand. And the others, I would request that you may have your suggestions and recommendations and maybe some questions in the chat box. And I would request my successors, the panelists and the moderators to consider the questions if there may have been any. So any question quickly for 2 to 3 minutes for this session, question and answer session?
There's one hand.
I am not. Yeah, Joycena, please.
There's one hand raised, Zia.
Hi, it's Sasha. I had a question for all the speakers, really. And I think that the fact that SDG 16 is one of the weakest SDGs and that human rights are not the core of the SDGs. And indeed, of course, we want to use the VNRs as an instrument, but the VNRs are not as strong as the UPRs. So my question would be, how can we strengthen that? And what is it only because there is a rift of the Atlantic between the human rights UN offices in Switzerland and the UNDESA economic social people in New York, and can that rift be bridged? Should we maybe have the General Assembly rotate between Geneva and New York? Any ideas we can suggest on how to strengthen SDG 16? Thank you.
Interesting question. Who would like to respond from among our panelists? Deirdre, would you like to respond?
Zia, I think whoever made the comment initially about the regional human rights mechanism being lacking in Asia might be somebody who could address that, because while I take Sasha's point about, you know, sort of rotating between Geneva and New York, I think it's time that, you know, human rights mechanisms and serious sort of review processes happen in every region and rotate between every region, not just between Geneva and New York, although they have traditionally been the sites for these human, you know, the UPR processes and so on to be reviewed. So maybe whoever raised that point might want to address it. Thanks.
Ajay, you raised this issue, Ajay, and maybe Becky.
I just might want to make some point. Thank you very much. I'll make a very short response to Sasha. It would be ideal to have the processes of the Geneva to be adopted in the SDGs, so that it's quite, you know, you're not restricted by 3 minutes to speak on whatever goals are being focused on, and you know, you have that time. But there are a lot of efforts to actually put the human rights-based approach to SDG 16 and apply the indicators to all of the SDGs based on a human rights-based approach. So those things can be adopted and influenced at the national level, so that you can have your governments doing that. And we tried it in the Philippines. I with UNDP here in the Philippines, we did a short intervention with the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines, where we asked them to please use the indicators of human rights and you know, ESCR and apply it to the SDGs. No? So it was a start, and they put up an observatory where they were trying to mainstream that kind of measurement, both of the SDGs and the HR principles, no? And I don't know what will happen, but at least there were efforts to start that off. And then with regards to the human rights mechanism, there's actually an ASEAN Human Rights Working Group, a mechanism that exists and is very robust in its processes, and that is actually you know, a body that actually are able to consolidate both civil society positions, and civil society is actually able to influence human rights, governments in that way, except that the policies may not be implemented eventually by the national governments that are being spoken to. So we're trying still to strengthen all those mechanisms that are available to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. John, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. It's a really interesting question that I think we could spend quite a bit of time on unpacking if we had the time. But I think the main issue really is political will. I mean, quite frankly, the political will, especially from the New York side, it just isn't there. I think also a lot of governments and member states see the SDG. I mean, the SDGs are a voluntary agenda, and I think that's part of the mental block from many governments and the missions also in New York, is that I actually fully believe that many governments agreed to the 2030 agenda in 2015, knowing full well that they were not going to be held accountable by the UN system or by their fellow member states, because it was a voluntary agenda, and are systematically making sure that the institution, the HLPF and other things, that it isn't able to hold them accountable. And I think we've seen through the VNR process, the many challenges, again, where governments really just use it to spout the good things that are happening, really not really talking about the realities. So I think one potential hook is Our Common Agenda report. I think we should see that as an opportunity for the UN to kind of reform and be more responsive to especially civil society. I think there's some really great recommendations in that report that we should definitely follow up on as civil society, and see how we can push the missions in New York to be a little bit more ambitious with the HLPF and the review system. But I think that's a huge existential challenge for us going forward.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to thank once again to all my panelists for discussing this very important agenda around SDG 16+, which is usually considered as the catalyst for all the SDGs. There are some comments, but since I have already taken up 15 minutes from Dr. Denison Jayasuriya, who may be actually, taking a cup of coffee from me while we meet New York sometimes, in future. But my apologies for this delay. I would like to hand over to Dr. Jayasuriya for the second panel discussion. For the first panel discussions, recommendations, our reporters have noted down most of the recommendations, and it will be included in the global solidarity statement and will be shared with all of you. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and over to Dr. Jayasuriya. Sir.
Thank you, Zia, and thanks, friends, for continuing to be in this very important discussion. We went through a very extensive stock taking in the first session, including the keynote address that set the challenges before us, and in this session on SDG and assessment in the Asian region, as well as specific recommendations to strengthen a human rights lens to the whole of SDGs and strengthening peace, democracy, accountability, space for civil society, and so forth. I've been asked to moderate the second session, and I would like to thank Ada and Josna for this opportunity. We are looking at this round to sharing country cases, including good practices. So it's about country sharing and good practices in that context, and then seeing how best we can address some of these concerns in a more systematic way. So good practices, we heard a lot of the challenges, we heard of a lot of bad practices of governments, and we want to see that change, and we were calling for stronger grassroots people's movement to take action and so forth. We have in this session, we have 8 presenters from 7 countries, and this would be significant to our discussion from different countries, from whether it's civil society or government or Human Rights Commission. They add on a specific aspect to good practices in peace and democracy, from voices from the parliamentarians, academics, civil society, including governments. I have the pleasure of welcoming the Malaysian Foreign Minister, who is here with us, Dato' Saifuddin Abdullah. Dato', you have 5 to 6 minutes. I lost count of time when Zia was moderating. I will just navigate it as we go along. Dato', for your input on Malaysia's position and so forth of your views. Over to you, Dato'.
Thank you, Denison. I wish to congratulate the organizers for organizing this assembly, People's Assembly, and thank you for inviting me. I will be sharing just 1 or 2 points from the Malaysian experience. First of all, on the 27th of this month, which is next week, the Prime Minister will be launching the 12th, or will be presenting the 12th Malaysia Plan for Malaysia in our Parliament. And the reason I'm sharing this is because the 12th Malaysia Plan has in it embedded the SDGs, and Dr. Denison and his team from the SDG Alliance was very instrumental in bringing up the people's voices and recommendations from the civil society into the 12th Malaysia Plan. And this was also in the preparation of the VNR, the team from the SDG Alliance was also playing a very significant role. And I think this is a good practice where government and the civil society, I must also underline that how I wish the participation of SDG Alliance was elevated to a higher level, but it is nevertheless a very good start. The other thing, number 2, I think Malaysia has been very lucky in the sense that even though we are multiracial, multi-religious country, but we have enjoyed peaceful coexistence thus far. Yes, there were pockets of issues here and there, but overall, I think we have been a very peaceful country. Even the change of government, this is quite a record, three changes of government in a matter of three years, but it was peaceful. And I won't say this is a good measure of democratization, but all I'm trying to say is I think the people in Malaysia, they are by nature very peaceful, and we have been able to live peacefully together for the longest of time. And one of the secret, I think, is because we practice tolerance between us. There is a lot of respect. We take that diversity is really a unique strength rather than a weakness. But I must also underline the fact that we should do even more better. Tolerance is important. It is useful. It has been working very well. But I think we need to really celebrate the differences as strength, and we need to love the other in a better way. On democratization, I think the latest interesting point here is that for the first time in Malaysia, the government and the opposition has signed an MOU for bipartisan work on certain areas of reform. For example, parliamentary reform, limiting the term of the Prime Minister, and so on. But the challenges are still there. I think we have to look at some of the structural barriers that has deep historical roots. that might impede progress. And these are issues that we need to look at. For example, levels and different levels of authoritarianism in certain ways, and underdevelopment that plugs certain pockets of our society that we still need to find ways to overcome. I say it is structural because it is not something that can be overcome overnight, but we really have to ask the hard questions. Where do we go wrong and how can we do things better? Politics of race is something that we should look at very seriously. Now I'm contradicting myself. I said we are living peacefully together. Yes, to a lot of extent, but we can do better if we can eliminate politics of race. I won't go into detail on that one. On Afghanistan and Myanmar, we are following the development very closely. We are not in a rush to recognize, but our priority is really to assist the Afghan people through humanitarian programs by the government, through our MTCP, Malaysia Technical Cooperation Program, through the CSOs, through the NGOs, and so on. I think one very important recommendation I want to propose is we must strengthen the partnership between the three major sectors in nation building. That is the state, the business, and civil society. Sometimes we have to work harder to impress the government. Not many governments in the world really wants to share this responsibility especially with civil society, and we really have to sensitize government ministers, officials to do this. And my last point, Dennis, is if I can propose to this assembly that in the next meeting, if we can have some interface between leaders of the civil society involved here and some government representatives, probably towards the end of the forum. So thank you, Denison.
Thank you, Dato, for sharing your views as well as the two specific recommendations. Maybe Ada might like to follow up your two suggestions, especially the second one. If you could assist to facilitate foreign ministers to also participate in such gatherings. I think you have facilitated in different roles with ASEAN ministers before, and the interface might be something where foreign ministers in other Asian countries might be more encouraged when a foreign minister takes the lead or takes the phone and calls another, tolong support this initiative. But I think serious dialogue, as you pointed out, is critical and important. I have been asked by Josna through a WhatsApp message to invite Ms. Kim Ho from Myanmar to speak. So I think Professor Sanjay will be willing to give way to Ms. Kim. Maybe you have another appointment or something. So over to Ms. Kim of Myanmar, if you can take the stand now, please.
Thank you very much for your kind accommodation. My apology to all the other speakers, only because I have to go to engage in a meeting at the Human Rights Council on Myanmar situation. That's the very reason, and I really appreciate your kind accommodation and allowing me to speak earlier. And also thanks for having me here, and also for all the solidarity with the people of Myanmar, all of the speakers who have mentioned the Myanmar situation. Thank you so much. The situation on the ground is now beyond breaking point, and there is no sign of the military stopping their terror and atrocity crimes. And the crimes that they are committing are really unimaginable and unspeakable. It's really merciless. It's a collective punishment that they are doing against the people, the whole country, who are categorically rejecting their military, attempted military rule. I use the word attempted. Until now, this coup is attempted. Myanmar is not fallen yet. it is still the military attempted coup is in fact failing. It's only also because people are so strong rejecting it and resisting it and determined, very, very determined to achieve their goal for federal democracy and to topple this military regime. And I'm sure you follow the media, but just very quickly, the junta has up to yesterday killed 1,114 people, arrested 8,313, and 6,666 people are in detention. Many of them are subjected to torture. About 104 are children. Family members are also being abducted, and some are sentenced to imprisonment because the military authorities couldn't find the people that they want to arrest. So now we are at the verge of getting into the nationwide civil war because the military has escalated their attacks in the ethnic areas, but also in the central Myanmar area where the Aung San Suu Kyi's, there is a strong resilience and supporters of the democracy and also supporter of Aung San Suu Kyi and National League for Democracy, who of course are by community-wise rejecting the military, and they are being severely targeted, including the mass killings. So just 2 months ago, there were like big mass killings happened in Sagaing region, for example. So the military, how that they are doing is also using the airstrikes. So this is something like, I would like also for your help to really see how we can actually stop how we can impose the global arms embargo, and also have the neighboring countries to really intervene to stop this area bombings and these military attacks on the ground. And now the military is now coming back to their very famous full cut policy, meaning like they are cutting everything that is coming to the people, including from the humanitarian aid to the information, but also they're using the people as human shield and forced laborers. So that's very serious ground situation. It goes beyond than it goes to these atrocity crimes. And that's the very reason that I want to say that we have to go, when it comes to Myanmar case, we will have to go beyond the SDG and the others, but it's really is, the point now here is to hold this military, the perpetrators to account by law. We must be able to stop them and also end the impunity that they have enjoyed for so long, including 4 years ago with the genocide against the Rohingya, now the crimes against humanity and war crimes against people in all parts of the country at this point. So I think this is so important that you will actually lend your support. Thanks to all of you for sharing your insights and also your support and making recommendations, and especially Nick, when you were making the points of the people coming together as a solidarity and where the Myanmar has a chance. This is where we are at the moment. That's why I'm saying that Myanmar is not fallen yet. Only because our people are not given into this military. They are not given up, and in fact, they are very strong and determined. And what do we need? What do we need is the solidarity from you in practical terms, including the making sure that your governments are not accepting this military and rejecting this military in all means, in all international fora. I find it quite troubling. Now the UN and international community are looking to the ASEAN as if ASEAN is the only entity to solve the Myanmar crisis. And in fact, we all know ASEAN don't have any teeth for that. They don't have that, the capacity for it. In fact, the ASEAN itself has many problems, and we have, Myanmar people have complete lack of confidence in ASEAN. Yes, we know there are some individual countries, including Malaysia, for example, and Indonesia. We want them to take the lead out of the ASEAN bloc to be able to help Myanmar people bring the solution. I think this is what we are looking for. We need the individual ASEAN countries with the principle on human really work with the National Unity Government, which is the people representative government of Myanmar, and make sure that they don't give any space to this military and any organs and entities under the control of the military. So that's something that I would like to put forth for your consideration. And like I said, the accountability to hold the Myanmar military to account and end this impunity is the only way for Myanmar people to move forward. And without that, if we are not able to do it, we are coming to the point of this nationwide civil war. And we have what people call as a Myanmar People's Defense Forces, because Myanmar people are left with no option but to exercise their birthright to defend themselves and protect themselves with whatever way that they can. Now people are taking up. The young generation who have a fuller future that they look forward. In the last 10 years, they worked so hard. And now that their future has been robbed by this military, and now they are taking up the arms to fight back to this military. So with all of my sharing now, I hope that you will actually join us in our efforts to bring this military to account, but also in addressing the humanitarian aid. Myanmar people have the local capacity on the ground. We need your support and your trust in Myanmar people that we know the solution, we have the capacity. We will only need you to join us and rejecting this military and assisting us on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Kim Ho. We stand in solidarity with you as civil society, and we will call on our governments, like the Malaysians here, we'll call on our foreign minister. I'm sure Gerald Joseph from the Human Rights Commission, and I'm sure all the international groups are with you. Thank you so much for taking time to share your challenges, your burden, but also the expectation from the wider community to stand alongside with you all and be counted. And I think that's something this other conference is specifically has put together. So thank you very much.
Denison. Yes, my name is Kin Omar, not Kin O. Just okay. Kin Omar, full name. Thank you.
Oh, and Omar.
Omar, yes.
Okay,
it's missing. Yeah, but I please also excuse me that I have to leave for another meeting, sure. And I wish you all the best. Thank you so much again for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I now pass the time to Professor Sanjay Paswan, the former Union Minister and member of the Legislative Council of India. Professor Sanjay. Over to you, sir. You need to unmute.
Yes. It's my turn?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. But let me tell you at first that you are so serious for this 16 number SDG. And we Indians, we Bihari, and especially people coming from the vulnerable sections and politics also, we are very much concerned for this peace. And rightly told by some speakers that, of course, for the global governments, peace is and justice is not a more important point of consideration for the respective countries. So we all have to raise this issue so that every ministers and every government and every countries needs to pay much more attention on this issue. Here I will tell you that jail happens to be the closed institutions. So that criminal justice system of India or of any country, that is must to be taken into account by we people, especially by civil society, how jail reforms can be accelerated and how it can be attributed to the 16 number of SDG. Because that jail happens to be, in fact, in India or in I can say, as per my surmise, that prisons are making a lesser criminal a bigger criminal. That's why how that justice can be given. And for the petty crimes, even a prisoner has to spend more than the period of sentences in the jails. So I think that jail happens to be one of the things where reforms must be needed. Secondly, I will tell you that for this justice and the delivery, the policing system, police, of course, police personnel are also very much in distress. So how it can be, especially in Bihar, and India, that these jail reforms, police reforms, how it can be done. I think if this will be done, then certainly this 16 number SDG can be fulfilled. And especially, I will request you all people that you should thanks to Jyotsna and her Asian Alliance, that she is now, of course, contacting we people, the people from the politics, people from the political and social fields. They are contacting us. So certainly, the feedback and feed forth from the political activists, if you get there, then certainly it is going to help a lot in policy formulations to policy making to the policy implementations. So I'm very much lucky that you people have chosen me to have some words. Especially, I would tell today this much only, that prison reforms must be, on a priority in this zone. Afghanistan, where we are facing, Myanmar is facing. So now the war of prisoners of war will be there. So how we can handle them and how we can give them some solace. That is the call of the time. So friends, I from my side, from my India side, from my government side, from my party BJP side, I welcome you all that you are so concerned for the SDG 16, and I am sure that amongst all 17 SDG, 16 is of course very much important for we all people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sanjay. Very important theme for prison reform and also on policing and access, strengthening access to justice, which is fundamental to SDG 16. Thank you very much. Can I move on to the next speaker, Mr. Gerald Joseph from the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, very active human rights activist from Malaysia. Gerard, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the kind invitation. First of all, greetings to His Excellency Minister Saifuddin and other colleagues here. Thank you for the organizers for bringing this together. I think the context of breakdown of democracy presupposes that we are all committed to democracy. And I think usually the failure happens because that journey is not complete. So the Myanmar story, the Afghanistan story, but I also say my own story, the Malaysian story. As I think Minister mentioned, change of government the last 3 times, I mean, been peaceful, but it has elicited a lot of anger that we need a much more robust democratic laws, insights. So one of the things for you who are not from Malaysia is about discussion about getting younger people get involved in politics. So under the 18 can vote, to have an anti-hopping law. So all this, you need to keep strengthening democracy and not take it for granted. I think projects which are halfway through is why we get a lot of difficulty, and also Malaysia, because of the changes. A lot of the law reforms actually was initiated under Minister Saifuddin in his first round as foreign minister, has stopped in the last 2 years. Now, hopefully we can restart. One of the important institutions, because I come from the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia as a commissioner, is the role of oversight independent body. So Human Rights Commissions plus other independent commissions are crucially important, and they must be functioning. And so if they continue to function, no matter change of government or not, these institutions will still be the voice in all times. So usually the joke in Malaysia is Suhakam, the short name for us. The commission is not very much liked by people in government, prison officials, police officers, as well as some members of parliament. But we take it as that's how we will continue. But I think partnership is forged through real work on the ground. And I think that's how independent oversight bodies like. So Human Rights Commission must comply with the A status of the Paris Principles. In Southeast Asia, we have 11 countries, only 6 have Human Rights Commission. Out of those 6, 2 are in status B. One of them include Myanmar. We never celebrate any commission in B, but we need to make sure that they are all in A. So I think independence is a good check and balance. Number two, a region can only work as good as its national function. So 5 countries still lack national human rights institution, and these 5 countries must be strengthened in order for the mood for human rights to push, in order to support the struggle of Myanmar or Afghanistan. The Malaysian Human Rights Commission has written a recent statement about the issue of Afghanistan, because we see a Human Rights Commission also needing to speak beyond borders. Human rights has no borders, right? So the Commission in Malaysia has already started planning for 3 regional dialogues called the Myanmar Dialogue on Democracy and Human Rights. Completed the first one. The second one is coming up, and I think we are also working with the foreign minister and hoping to get the envoy and other stakeholders for a dialogue. And we had a dialogue with the Myanmar-based NGOs in Malaysia, because what happens in our neighboring country definitely has a big impact on Malaysia, Indonesia, and other countries. We can see that Malaysians can feel that because of the refugee status, the Rohingya and other Myanmar refugees by the thousands or hundreds of thousands in Malaysia. The next point is about a functioning regional human rights mechanism, ASEAN. Sadly, you're right, ASEAN is not strong, neither is its Human Rights Commission. We need to find a way where it can be an independent regional human rights commission like that in Latin America, in Europe, or even in Africa. We are not there yet, and that's why it's difficult for a few of the ASEAN human rights commissioners to try to push, because of the ASEAN concept of what it's called consensus, but what I call veto, because you just need one country to block, disagree. It doesn't move forward. So I think that's quite regressive in this modern day of decision-making processes. Another point I would like to suggest is that part of us ensuring no regression or breakdown in human rights or democracy is the stop of extremism. I think Minister spoke earlier about racism in Malaysia. And this means there's a growth of what I call right-wing groups. It could be NGOs, it could be academics, and they are always a counter voice for real progress according to minimum international standards, such as human rights standards. So we need to call them out. We need to stop the growth of this, and we need to strengthen politicians to be able not to be populist, but to stand up for what is right and good. And I think racism and religious bigotry is a good way to sell your politics, but a bad way for democracy for a whole nation. And I would end by saying that we would need also to stop corruption. We will need independent anti-corruption commission. We need an ombudsperson's office in Malaysia. We need an independent police oversight mechanism in Malaysia. We don't have that yet. IPCMC, we were pushing, hoping it would happen, but it has not happened. All these things will then check excessive power, but also will check society that tries to abuse the cracks to push their agenda. So I hope that with these few points, maybe we should look at our home ground to ensure we don't break down in Malaysia, in Singapore, in other countries in the world, but also more so, we need to strengthen a global solidarity commitment to what is development, which is clearly intersects with human rights without calling it a choice of either one. Thank you, Professor Dennison.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gerard. I think this is a very important point in terms of the Malaysian experience and a number of the other countries. SDG 16 definitely has a place for independent human rights commission and other independent bodies that would be not only a watchdog, but would really play a role in the promotion of human rights and the restraint of negative aspects to democracy, justice, and enhanced peace. So I think independent institutions as an example of case study and documenting that and networking closer with human rights commissions is a step forward, and possibly the ASEAN group or members within that, or like even India having a very good human rights commission, could push at the Asian level that was highlighted today for an Asia level, Asia Pacific level a mechanism, a regional mechanism, including some have called for independent court and so forth. Can I welcome Ms. Kaisha? I might pronounce the name wrongly. I'm sorry for that. Ms. Kaisha from Aero from Kyrgyzstan. If you can share, and I'm sorry I've mispronounced your name. If
okay.
you can. Okay, sorry about that. Really sorry.
Yeah,
Kaisha, have I got Kisha or
Kaisha?
Kaisha? Okay, I
And
got that one.
thank you, Professor James
Thank you. All
Surya,
the
for
best.
giving me opportunity to share my experience. And thank you for honoring all speakers and colleagues today. And thank you for opportunity to give me which I can share as Kazakhstani experience. And I will share my screen, and I hope you can see that. It's correct. Can you see this?
Yes, yes, Kaisha, we can see.
Good. Thank you so much, Jasna. And I will share you some Kazakhstani experience and our best practices in related with SDG 16. And I would like to just highlight what some key issues related to human rights implementation in Kazakhstan. And yeah, in the past decades, Kazakhstan had some challenges with human rights implementation. It's you can see in my first slide the situation in Kazakhstan for civil index. You can see Kazakhstan characterized like civil society sector in abstracted, and you see issues related with violation on women rights, and 50% of girls and subjected to violent methods of discipline in family, and 45 experience psychological aggression and violence. And you can also, we had some CSO and our media was faced in challenges related to freedom of expression, and government actively used an overly restrictive legal framework to harass and discourage independent and critical voice. And under World Press Freedom Index in 2020, we has you see we has a 157 spot, and in just in 1 year it was just a 1 point score in comparison with 2019. It is a situation with fundamental freedoms in Kazakhstan, and other issues related to human rights. It's of course money laundering index ranked at 33 for spots among the 141 countries. And we see this financing of terrorism, terrorist act, and terrorist organization has been recognized as a criminal offense by Kazakhstan. And of course, we are now a member of Egmont Group, and in Kazakhstan, we seek additional response to approaches to newly emerging threats and improve the legislative base on these areas. And corruption, and also like in other Asia countries, it is a widespread in the executive branch and enforcement agency, local government administration, etc. And according to Transparency International, Kazakhstan scores 33 points from 100. And what we do in Kazakhstan now, it's a created open government electronic platform. We have now 5 open data portals, and we have Republican Special Monitoring Group led by CSO, currently active under anti-corruption agency, and work together on the all level of activity on the around the country. And what we also try to like to highlight now in Kazakhstan, we have now a real political will to improve human rights situation in Kazakhstan. And our President Tokayev in June, and recently in 2021, he signed a decree calling for the approval and implementation human rights action plan. And we are very encouraged as CSO, and we believe what this 9 priority you can see in the blue color, I highlighted this, what real situation with human rights implementation should be much getting better. But it's one of these is for us it's important, but all our mechanism of interaction with UN treaty bodies and special procedure of UN Human Rights Council, and of course it's ensuring the right of victims of human trafficking, human rights citizens with disability, elimination of discrimination against women, a right of freedom of association, like also freedom of expression, human right to life and public order, and increasing efficient interaction with non-governmental organizations between and government. And of course, it's issues related with human rights and criminal justice enforcement and prevention of torture and treatment. And which is also important to us, but all this implementation of human rights action plan now under control on the high level. It's Executive Office President of the Republic of Kazakhstan. So, and we're looking forward to our, in our next, our report can be more, positive the situation in Kazakhstan. And we have, for us, is with now stating a recommendation which need to increase CSO and government response for implementation of this action plan, because it's not only government response, but it's also important to CSO be more involved, more active involved to implementation this action plan, and also like implementation of SDG localization, especially for vulnerable and marginalized groups. We need to strengthen this mechanism for inclusive public participation. And now we are in phase and we're looking forward to transforming the relation between CSO and government, see about new form of civic activism in response to internal political and global financial, economic and political processes. And also what we need to do, it's need to create and develop modern system of human rights mechanism in Kazakhstan and contribute to sustainable development country. And we know what our meeting on National Human Rights Council, they discussed about how we can improve our indicators on SDG 16, which should be related with human rights issues related with NDHR and UPR. So we hope it can be now work on SDG indicators related to human rights, and also we talk about urbanism and development civic initiative in urban planning and participatory planning, and talk about democratization politics at the local level. It's a question about decentralization in Kazakhstan. But also in my other slide, I would like to highlight our work as Argo with our regional cooperation with CSO, with our neighbor countries, and all Central Asia countries, it's our neighbors of Afghanistan. And we are really concerned about a situation which happened now in Afghanistan, and all emergency issues related to help our colleagues from Afghanistan. It's under like hot topic in Argo, under our Innovation for Change initiative or in Central Asia, which Afghanistan and Mongolia is a part of our this network. And our colleagues from Akbar, they call it about their statement, how we can support and what kind of needs internal of this country, what kind of real situation from inside, as they call it this. And I just like to share this information from Akbar community. And of course, it's issues related with humanitarian assistance to people across the Afghanistan. So, and also I share some links about flash appeal, which launched by UN. And what we see now, how many people need to support and humanitarian assistance. And under this our flash appeal, we see what additional 2 million people to tele of this targeted to humanitarian assistance. And but now everyone know what is now humanitarian actions extremely challenging now in Afghanistan, and it is combined with operation constraints and even shrinking humanitarian space. And maybe we need to be solidarity on this side. It's really in time what we need to help our colleagues. So this is just some facts about this from Akbar. So in Kazakhstan, we had a so peaceful, wonderful program for support education of young Afghanistan women in Kazakhstan. It was a program for supporting economic empowerment of Afghan women through education and training in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which was realized by UN Women and UNDP in Kazakhstan. But unfortunately, now it's a program status in pause. But we hope that we need to continue. You see these happy faces of our women in Kazakhstan, but now we don't know how we can support, and they should continue educate, and maybe we can do also in this case of, just to share how it's work really, and this South and South cooperation, trilateral cooperation between our countries can support this our women's and political level. So thank you so much, and
thank you
for opportunity, give me this opportunity. So
thank you very much, Ms. Kaisha. Thank you for illustrating. I think one key agenda that you highlighted is the Human Rights Action Plan, and you have linked that with SDG localizing as well. And that, I think that would be something worth following through in future other meetings to see the outcome of the HRAP in your own country and work that you are doing. Thank you very much. We have three more speakers and time is passing by very quickly. I think Josna had the mind that most of us will take 5 to 6 minutes. Let me welcome Ms. Shin from KCOC from South Korea to share your views at this point. Over to you, Ms. Shin. We can't hear you.
You need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. First of all, I'm grateful to participate in this forum so that we can discuss present crisis in Asia together. KCOC has emphasized with the most vulnerable in Myanmar and Afghanistan, and we issued statements urging multilateral efforts to overcome the ongoing situation. In addition, measures to support to live through the respective crises are being discussed with the Korean government and parliament nowadays. We want to continue in our solidarity, champion and support efforts, various Asian countries, including Myanmar and Afghanistan, to overcome these crises. Today, my presentation would like to share our experience from the perspective of international development cooperation, uniting various Asian countries. SDG 16+ deals with the way to sustain measures of peace, human rights, democracy, and good governance. But it is not easy to realize them through ODA, Official Development Assistance. Although Korea's the Framework Act on International Development Cooperation includes the purpose of promoting them, it is vague to know to what extent this has been achieved because this result has not been evaluated. In addition, since bilateral cooperation accounts for 70% of Korean ODA, it is a very sensitive political issue to directly support these bills of the governments of partner countries. Since the introduction of SDGs in 2016, SDG 16 discussions have been underway, but the discussions are insignificant. In particular, the omission of SDG from our government's 5-year strategy on international development cooperation and the inclusion of a model of win-win national interest with partner countries is one of the primary concerns from Korean CSOs. The government says that the meaning of this win-win model is for the universal national interest. However, the concept is not yet clear. It remains to be seen how much this model can embrace peace, human rights, and democracy. Therefore, civil society's criticism of the model is expected to be sharp over the next 5 years. One of the ways the ODA can be implemented for peace, human rights, and democracy is to expand cooperation with civil society. Historically, Western donor countries have utilized ODA in this way. Korea is one example to receive these resources since Korean War, which helped Korean civil society to be able to play a leading role in the overthrow of a dictatorship and the birth of a democratic government. However, as a result, civil society was perceived as being against the government in Korea, and the term civil society itself is also interpreted politically. Such a perception only sees the civil society as an object to be monitored by the government. In 2016, the government changed the civil society cooperation program without discussion or consultation with us to increase our transparency. One of the harmful effects of this was the government abolishing of the program to support local CSOs in developing countries directly. We thought it was challenging to expand the scale and scope of the government civil society cooperation without institutionalizing our relationship with government. So we continue to raise issues through the National Assembly and the OECD DAC's peer review mechanism. As a result, in 2019, the government and civil society created a policy framework for government civil society partnership in international development cooperation. Hereafter, I call it partnership policy through mutual discussions and consultation. This policy is meaningful in that it is the first government CSO policy document in Korea that stipulates this type of partnership. And this policy of partnership has led to a new opportunity in 2020. The government opened an additional fund around $9 million for civil society to respond to COVID-19 in partner countries. At a time when everything halted due to COVID-19, the government capitalized on the capability of civil society. This was very unusual in the relationship between the Korean government and civil society. Furthermore, we participate in the process of establishing our government's 5-year strategy and included this partnership as one of the main pillars of its strategy. The government and civil society have also established a system to continuously monitor and improve this progress over the next 5 years in harmony. Through the institutionalization of this partnership, we hope that it will lead to change in our governance, and that changes will again be linked to promote peace, human rights, democracy in partner countries. Based on our experience I have shared so far, I would like to suggest the following 3 points. First, the existing response to the crisis of peace, human rights, and democracy has excluded citizens and civil society. However, in the SDG framework, citizens and civil society are the main subjects, so the space of civil society must be secure. To this end, it may be challenging depending on the situation of each country, but the government-civil society partnership must be institutionalized. It would be better to start and gradually expand even a small part that the government and civil society can mutually agree on. In this process, donor countries and civil society should support this institutionalization of partner countries' government society partnership. Yep.
The organizers are pushing me because we've got 2 more speakers. If you can give your recommendations in writing or post it in the chat, because we have not that your points are not good. I think they are fantastic. But I got a phone call earlier. I got a WhatsApp message. If you just take a minute to wind up.
Okay. I give me a 10 seconds. I will finish this presentation. So the second point is including cooperation with the local civil society in partner countries. We should demand the expansion of government-civil society partnership in donor countries in Asia. And when using ODA due to the limitation of this resource, neutral terms such as conflict resolution, capacity building, and expansion of participation are used rather than terms of peace, human rights, and democracy in consideration of the limitation of ODA. In addition, it is required to open a new fund that can support the promotion of peace, human rights, and democracy directly. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And sorry, it's beyond my control, unfortunately, because time passes on. But I think your theme of the partnership model between the government and CSOs in the use of the ODA and its context of human rights promotion in the context of development is something worth exploring in detail, because it's an Asian model that could be replicated by other countries. And I'm sure Japan likewise would have similar experiences. So thank you very much for that. And I think Malaysia can follow or look at the Korean model stronger as well. Can I ask Mr. Jan? Josna is telling me the last 2 speakers only got 3 minutes, but I feel sad to tell someone from Afghanistan that he's only got 3 minutes. Mr. Jan Mohammed, if you can share, please. Is Mr.
Yes,
Jan?
Thank you very much. Can you
Mr.
hear me,
Jan.
please?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I have a speech note with myself here. I have no presentation for sharing with you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm John Muhammad Ahmadi. I'm the director of Afghanistan National Education Coalition, known as the biggest CSO education network in Afghanistan. With a special thanks to ADA and its national, regional, and global partners to organize this important event in this critical time. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and good evening. Let me present Afghan people greetings and thank you all for your support to Afghan people. Since the Taliban taken over the control of Afghanistan capital on Sunday, August 15, after the government collapsed, all of the sudden, all things changed. You cannot imagine the impact on local people and social behavior. Today, most of social media platforms focusing on what is happening in Afghanistan. New headlines containing changes in Afghanistan, some real but some fake. Whole world have been witness about the changes political landscape in my country. But what is important is the victimization of civilian who is not involved in politics. My major highlight on good practices to build peaceful society in our region, especially through quality education, is to educating our children to really respect peace, human being, and believe in human right principles, to teach them to elect the right person for the right position in the right time, especially in presidential and parliamentary elections. What we suffer today is the result of wrong politics, investing more on war and conflict rather than peace building all over the country, including Afghanistan. We need to transfer political power to civilians for the sake of humanity through quality education on creating, building, and strengthening peace in mind of our children, adolescents, and youth to make them able to elect the right person for the right position to lead nations for prosperity and development in our region. Security and political instability have negative psychological impact, especially on children, adolescents, and youth. We all are direct victims of insecurity in our region. Afghan people suffer today, but which nation is next? Who suffer next? Current situation in Afghanistan affects our whole region, directly or indirectly, today or tomorrow. Therefore, peace building through different ways, especially quality education within our society, must be prioritized today as a critical and continued effort to have peaceful region to make us able to focus on economic, social, cultural, educational, and technological development. Finally, I request regional and international organizations to continue and strengthen the humanitarian support to Afghan people and CSOs inside the country and mentally support Afghan refugees all over the country, especially provision of free education opportunities for all. Thank you very much for your time and your support.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jan, and for the work that you are doing. Be assured of our solidarity along with you. Let me move on quickly to Mr. Vrilin from Fingo, Finland. Sorry about my pronunciation. You've got 3 minutes. I'm so sorry. You're the last speaker on this panel. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And I definitely understand that it's always the last one. It's not really in a nice situation. But anyway, all my respect and thanks a lot for the colleagues who are really in much more difficult circumstances than I am in Finland. So all my thoughts with the people in Afghanistan and Myanmar and all the success. And hopefully we can really find the common work that we can really showcase the solidarity as well. I have a couple of points what I would like to share with you and based on the experiences what the Finland has done. I'm working in the civil society side, but we are working very closely with all the other stakeholders as well. And this is why I really believe that one of these examples what I'm going to show you explains a little bit on that ways of working. So in Finland used to have around 100 years ago, we had a civil war after independence quite quickly after that. And that was really boring one, really difficult one. But exactly one of the solutions which came out of this civil war was that exactly every government what the Finland has had from the beginning are the coalition government. So that really explains that there are different parties finding common solutions and working together. So this is perhaps one of my suggestions to keep in mind. Another one after this civil war was that there were a situation where the Finland was one of those very first countries who gave the voting right for women. So every adult in the society has a right to vote, and I think that's one fundamentally important point, how to really build the nation states. The very specific some kind of character of the Finnish society is that we have very strong civil society. So there's some kind of common joke that every Finn is a member of at least 5 civil society organizations, which means that exactly the mentality of the civil society exists there wherever you are working on. Are you the civil servants or politicians or private sector or civil society? Everybody has this mentality that we need to work together. We want to really put attention on the participation. We have to have the transparency mechanism. We need to have the open information opportunities, etc. So that helps a lot because you really understand that there is the need for every human being in the societies. Another point, and I very much echo the colleague from Afghanistan about the role of education. Already in 1921, the Finland decided that there's every child has to go to school. So this is really your opportunity. And the philosophy of the education has really based on the human rights and democracy. So it really matters that what is your mindset and how much you are built on understanding that the peace really belongs to all of us. So it's really important point. And my last point comes about this current situation where we are living in Finland at the moment. Again, we have the coalition government, and the government program is based on Agenda 2030, which we in the civil society will lobby that very much. So exactly the whole government program is taking account about all the aspects of the SDGs and Agenda 2030. And specifically linked to the SDG 16, I would like to highlight 2 examples. The one is, which we are not at all very proud so far, but now hopefully there will be the good success afterwards, is that we have a quite big number of indigenous people living in Finland, in the north part of Finland, Sami people, and they haven't really treated very well during the Finnish history. And now finally in this year there is the Truth and Conciliation Commission be appointed, and finally that is the time where we are really looking for the past, how we have behaved towards on the indigenous people. And my last point is also, which is one of the activities which is now exactly just launched a month ago, is that Finland has established the Rule of Law Center. It's based in the University of Helsinki, supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the point is really that based on the Finnish experiences on building the democracy, you can learn. You can't export about the one country model, but you can give this some kind of ideas how to work and learn from those. And this is really focusing on working with the those countries who are in the most vulnerable situations. So perhaps this is just for the one example which could be inspire you in Asia as well. But thanks a lot for the invitation. It's been a very important opportunity today to really learn, to hear very much on the situations, and happy to take any questions or support you afterwards. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers who have shared quite comprehensively and bringing out your best practices. We have run out of time, and Josna has been consistent in her messages to me, and so we will not open up at this time. But in looking at best practices, definitely a number of points stand out, and I'll just take a minute on it. I think we heard the voice or call for parliamentary reform and bipartisanship that was highlighted. Second, we heard on human rights independent institutions or mediating institutions that can be check and a balance. We also heard of the partnership of overseas development assistance funding and civil society in its channeling, and other Asian countries need to look at that. The place of human rights action plan along with SDGs, which can definitely strengthen SDG 16 and taking a rights framework. Fifthly, the role of education that was highlighted and in a key way. And finally, of course, standing in solidarity, whether it's with Myanmar or with Afghanistan and so forth. So with that note, thank you to all who participated in this session, and thank you to all the speakers. So do I pass it to Dayal or Rina at this time?
To Dayal.
To Dayal. Okay, over to you. Thanks, Josna, for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Danishan. Thank you so much. This is Daya Sagar. I'm a focal point of South and Southeast Asia at Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, and I'm going to moderate this third panel. Definitely, we have heard many things about the situation of South Asia. Okay, just I just want to say that how our session goes on. First, I'll invite to Rina, Ward Rina, and then she will speak about how we can improve the situation of human rights justice in Asia. And this session will be interactive session, so we'll break out into 4 groups. And after that, there will be the sharing of the draft statement. In this way, we will conduct this session. Okay. First of all, I would like to invite to Wadrina. She is Program Officer of Feminist Development, Justice, and Breaking Out of Migration at Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law, and Development, APW. It is very popular known as WLD. And she is also the co-chair of Asia Pacific CSO Engagement Mechanism. May I invite to Wadrina to give your thoughts in how we can improve the situation of human rights, justice, good governance in Asia region. Over to you, Rina.
Thank you so much, Daya. Hello, everyone. It's really happy to be here. And then I also want to say a big thank you for Josna, who have been consistently, contacting me, and then also say that, to invite me as a speaker, and also for Ada, of course, to hold this and organize this event. I think this is really important. Before that, Daya, how many minutes I have actually?
Yes, 6 to 7 minutes because.
All right. I'll try in 6 minutes. Okay, so I'm also just want to say why this is very important discussion, and then also the event itself is very important, and why SDG 16 is important. I think that we have been talking about it since this morning, and then it's because SDG 16 is talking about peace, talking about human rights, talking about accountability, talking about inclusive institution, and it's very important also to note that it's also talking about justice, right? And then the word justice is actually a very thing that us in the Asia Pacific civil society deem very important. Yeah, it's about recognizing there was injustices, recognizing there was some actors, perpetrators of injustices, and recognizing that people who are actually the survivor, that's who are the victim of those injustices, is actually needs to have remedy. Yeah, so that's why us in the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, and also in Asia Pacific CSO, when we are talking about the SDG, what we want is actually development justice. There is actually talk about how we able to redistribute wealth, power, and resources. So it's about redistributive justice, economic justice, social and gender justice, environmental justice, and accountability to the peoples. So I want to just look at that, because we cannot actually talk on SDG 16 in silo. Yeah, it needs to really connect with the issue of economic, social, and political, And then we need to also connect it with the various form of injustices that we see. And then we I think that in APRSAM, also in APWLD, we have tried to put together some of the trends of the injustices that we see in the region. And then one of those is that one thing that is important that we also need to understand, there's a really strong geopolitical shift in this region. Yeah, this region, Asia and the Pacific, Asia, we're talking about Asia here now in this event, is a region that has long been a significant geopolitical strategic battleground between the so-called North and South and West and East, right? And it continues to be a battleground in the so-called US-China rivalry, even as the EU and the countries such as, okay, I'm going to stop here. Is there?
I'm sorry, Rina. Let me
Yes. It's okay, Josna. Yeah, where was I? Okay, so it continues to be a battleground, our region, in the so-called US-China rivalry, and then also EU and countries like UK, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and Russia look to retain and expand their power in the region. So we have heard, of course, that we have heard about the China's growing economic influence in the region with the Belt and Road initiatives, right? Like we heard about all those investors, you know, like the infrastructure development that also displays a lot of indigenous peoples and then create some conflict in several areas, right? We also heard about the recently signed, in the middle of pandemic, can you believe that? The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, that is understood to be the largest trade agreement ever struck. There will be covering 1/3 of the world population. And then this RCEP was negotiated, if you remember, as a China-backed alternative to what US-backed Trans-Pacific Partnership, right? Now the US is actually kind of withdrawing from the TPP, but now they're actually thinking about going back again. But however, you also know that the US looks to recalibrate its power and presence in the region in the wake of the change of their government through a Build Back Better world with other powerful countries in the G7. If you saw the picture, you know, they're going to talk about how to, you know, try to tackle China's power without even them being around in the conversation. And then also the renewed Indo-Pacific strategy, where the region continues to see the increasing militarization and economic capture. So that is where the backdrop, I think, that we also need to realize when we are talking about SDG 16, there's a lot of things that we need to look into: the geopolitics, the economic, the interests, you know, the economic interest, the economic capture, the militarization, and etc., etc. And of course, when we are talking about this, a lot of crisis that is happening, we know that we have been looking into the inequalities crisis, you know, even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, but it's really see that how it's got worsened, and then also where we actually have a gender impact also on that. We totally see that. And then we see during this pandemic how the big technology companies, you know, they actually gain more, and then they said that their total wealth now, based on the research, is now stands at 11.95 trillion US dollar, you know, for just the tech companies, which is equivalent to what G20 government have spent in the response to the pandemic. So it really shows like a huge inequality where people are struggling to actually even get a job. This tech company is actually striving, right? And then, of course, we also need to see it from the issue of debt crisis that we are having right now. I heard some of you already discuss about that, maybe, so I'm not going to dwell into it. And then in this midst of the pandemic, of course, yeah, there is also like some tendency, like for instance, in my country, Indonesia, they actually open up, they try to actually what do you call it, recover from the COVID-19 by attracting more investors to come into the country. And then that way that they actually have like this new law that they come up with. They call it omnibus law for the job creation, right? Which actually what they're trying to do is lowering all the standard for environment regulation or safeguard, lowering all the standard for labor regulation and etc. You know, and then really make everything race to the bottom. So this kind of investment regime still continue. The trade investment regime still continue. With, you know, as you may know, there's a lot of big fight now in the UN in relation with the issue of vaccines and the issue of intellectual property rights. And then this is something that I think that most of you is also know about the issue, and then part of the campaign to actually demand, you know, vaccine as a public common good, and then really demand for us to actually, you know, what do you call it, not dismantling, but, you know, repel all the trade rules and agreements that is actually not allowing the government to have a space to be able to actually address the issue of COVID-19, right? We also hear a lot, of course, on the crisis of multilateralism. We heard it so many times. If a lot of you, you know, working and then advocating in the UN spaces, there is, to be frank, there is a crisis in traditional methods of engaging with the global and regional norm setting through multilateral institution and regional mechanism. This is very, very concerning. And then additionally, the UN institution have failed, I think, to agree on significant issues such as climate change, gender equality, wars and conflict, and most recently on the reform needed to address COVID-19, still debating about the IPR. And then also, even last time when we are talking about the issue of debt crisis, many of the developed countries is actually not wanting to have like in the special rapporteur or mandate holders for the external debt to be exist anymore. So there's a lot of question mark, especially now with the further move from multilateralism to multi-stakeholderism, that with a very systematic arrangement, and then sometimes it sounds so good that we also buy it, you know, that is okay, multi-stakeholderism is actually good, but this is something that we also need to be cautious of, because it does give like some large corporation equal power with states and citizens. I think that Daya is trying to stop me. Is it my time up, Daya? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, my time up. All right, so I just give me like one last 10 second, Daya, okay? So okay. I'm just saying that this is an additional to what I believe that you already heard from this morning about democracy, how democracy is under siege, how the Asia and the Pacific region has seen a rise of anti-democratic, hyper-masculine, patriarchal, authoritarian, and militarized government, right? And then also, what I want you to actually say that here, when we are talking about the action and strategy, like remember, despite all of these challenges, that there's always a beacon of hope, and then the hope is in the resistance, is in the movement. And then when I said resistance, is not only, although it's very, very important to actually meaning the resistance that's happening on the ground that we see for the civil disobedience movement. We see it also from in India. We see it in many, many places. That is really good, but also how we keep our resistance, our activism in the UN spaces, and how we ensure that the UN spaces will not be co-opted, you know, and then still we are still the grassroots organization that is going to fill in the space, telling the realities on the grounds and ensuring those voices is actually the one that be heard in that kind of spaces. I'm going to stop now, Daya. I'm really sorry. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Rina, for very powerful presentations and thoughts. Now we go to the the breakout sessions. Before going to the breakout sessions, the the situation of SDG 16 is not in even in the normal situation or before the COVID. And definitely we know that after the COVID-19, it has deteriorated the situation of the peace, justice, human rights, and democracy, good governance in our region. We have heard that from the NIC. We also heard from the our friends from the UNSCAP, and we also heard the experiences and the stories from the different countries. So definitely, we have to come out with some concrete ideas how we can address the issues and the challenges we have been facing in our region. We go to the breakout session, and it will be of 25 minutes, right? 25 minutes, and there will be 4 groups. The first group, the first group will be the global and regional institution. That means, our friends, our participants who represent global and regional institution, they go to that group, they go to that group. And the second group will be from the South and Southwest Asia group. Our friends, our participants who are from South and South Asia, they will go to the that group, second group. And the third group will be the Southeast Asia group. Our participants here who are from Southeast Asia, they will go to the third group. That means Southeast Asia group. And the fourth and last group will be the Central and the Northeast Asia group. Our participants and colleagues who are from Central and the Northeast Asia, they will go to that fourth group. And in this way, there will be 4 groups. There will be 4 groups, and you will choose your own groups. And there will be 25 minutes for group discussion. And next, I would like to request that for each group, after going into your group, you will choose your moderator and the rapporteur. And there will be one, only moderator, one person who will act as the moderator as well as the rapporteur. And he or she will take notes, especially the conclusions of your group. And I would like to request that you just give your suggestions or the recommendations or the strategic directions or the concrete actions which are needed to overcome the challenges and issues what we have discussed today. So again, I would like to request that just focus on the recommendations or the suggestions. Okay, now we will go into the we are to the break rooms. May I request our friends Naresi to break out the rooms?
Dayaji, I wanted to make an announcement.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I have shared the link to the Jamboard here. I'm sharing it again. So the breakout room, you go, just you click at the link, go to your sub-region. I have put 3 topics: recommendations for Afghanistan, recommendation for Myanmar, and the general recommendation. Please feel free to add your recommendations using the sticky note. If you have any problem accessing the Jamboard, please let us know. Thank you so much.
Narasi?
What is the first room name? There, sir.
Global and regional institution.
Global and
regional institution.
Regional.
A second is
South
and Southwest Asia.
South
and
East
Southwest
and
Asia.
South East Asia.
And
Third,
Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia.
And next,
Fourth,
Central and Northeast Asia.
Northeast Asia. Where?
Dayaji, may I suggest something now?
Yeah.
Since we have very few participants left now, can we just share the Jamboard link here and ask everyone to, write here instead of getting into the breakout room? What do you suggest?
Narasi, I think Narasi, you have. Narasi is working.
Which room? Room? I think there is a room already created.
Okay, thanks.
Can we go to the room? Narasi?
Yes, there is a room already created.
Then how do you go?
You are there, Sagar, in number
Other friends.
1. Room number 1. Room number 2, room number 3, room number 4. All right.
Dayaji?
Yeah. I think friends are joining.
Okay. Thank you. So what we can do, we can just click at the Jamboard link that I shared, and you can go to your room.
Yeah. Jamboard.
Yes. The link that I've shared, just go to that link. So we are in the Southwest Asia there, Ji.
Okay, that's fine.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to go to the sticky note below the arrow one and select the sticky note. What is the suggestion for Myanmar?
Reena ji, how many friends are here now in this group?
So in this group, we have 4. We have Reena, we have one more, we have myself and yourself. So it will be really nice to come up with to write your comment in the Jamboard. Are you able to access it?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do we conduct it?
So below the arrow mark, there is a sticky note.
Yeah.
Select one sticky note and write the recommendations. Anything for Myanmar, for Afghanistan, or general recommendation.
Josna, are you adding sticky
Yes,
notes?
I am. Can you see?
Yeah.
In the South and South West Asia, I've added. We have got a good number in the global one.
Yeah.
There, we don't have much time actually. Maybe we can
Yeah.
wrap up in just 5 minutes and
Yeah,
then
okay.
ask Jamila to give the closing remark, and we can finalize this later. Maybe by end of tonight, I will share the draft with you. So maybe just 5 minutes more. Or if you want, you can just read it, what is there, and then give it to Jamila.
Josna, will read statement or what we do?
You can read it. You can read from here.
Yeah.
I am putting here, and then I will do the finalizer statement. So maybe just 4 more minutes and we can come to the plenary.
Okay.
I'm trying to put as many points as I want, as I can.
I think there will be no much time, and from our group we will share who is the rapporteur.
Maybe you want to share?
Huh?
You want to share?
Yeah, who is Moto from Moto E7 Plus?
Mm-hmm.
There is another friend, from Moto E.
Okay.
Just now, I think you have to share
No,
from our.
no problem. No problem.
Yeah. We don't have much time. I think we should
Yes.
give only 3 minutes, maximum 3 minutes.
Can you just announce that we have just 3 minutes and we'll come back?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Josna, Diane.
Hi, Rina. Thank you so much for your time. Actually, this is the last session gets a bit.
I was trying. I still have like the strategy part, and I was like, shit, I should have just focused on the strategy part.
Rina, but could you please share the strategy part? We will just incorporate it.
Okay, sure.
That's so kind of you. If you have anything, you can just share. I will share the draft statement with you. It's there. I will share the link to the draft statement. And once you have time, you can just have a look at it. You can add it.
Sure. I'll do that. I'll send it to you after this. Yeah.
Just now we will share the the Google file, right?
Right.
Statement. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I think you have been working on it.
Yes. So if you want, we can move to the main room, plenary or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why not? Why is it only leave meeting, not leave room?
No, yeah, it says close all rooms. Okay, it says leave breakout room.
Yeah.
So hey, leave it.
Okay, welcome back, friends. We will start our panel after 1 minute.
네, 얼른 골라서.
Hello?
Josnaji, I think we can start,
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, friends and colleagues. Definitely you have done very good group work in your groups. And next, what we are going to do that, definitely we have chosen one rapporteur from your group, and rapporteur will share the main conclusions of your group works. I will just give 3 minutes for each rapporteur, and you will briefly share your conclusions, especially the recommendations what we had made in your groups. First of all, I would like to invite the rapporteurs from the first group, global and regional institutions. Could you please voluntarily unmute yourself and share your conclusions of your group work? Global and regional institution. Who is going to share? Can you hear me from first group? Hello. In first group, maybe they are working. Anybody from group 1, global and regional institution, can share your conclusions of your group? And nobody is responding. I think we can go to the second group, South and Southeast Asia. Josna, could you please share the conclusions of second group?
Thank you, Dayaji. In the second group, we had discussion. We just put things on Jamboard, and we have seen what has happened in Afghanistan. So it says Afghanistan people now suffer, so much suffer. So what's the next? I think this is the important point to introspect among all of us. We also demand an inclusive government in Afghanistan, including women, ethnic minorities, and indigenous group. We need to have the regional and the international solidarity support. There was some general recommendation based on the experience of Philippines, where it was said that Philippines started its first, it was the first country to start the voting rights for women, and the importance of education is also very important. I think these 2 points that came up, these things could be adapted, in a different region in our country. Also, the importance of coalition government that was said. Because coalition government, when we have support, different political parties come together, and when the civil society is also very strong, so there is a strong possibility to have a strong country. And no doubt Finland is #1 in SDGs achievement. So in Myanmar, it was there is a strong recommendation to support, to get a regional and the international support, because the people of Myanmar, that's what they need, because the humanitarian aids are being cut in Myanmar. So how do we generate that solidarity and support for Myanmar? So that's all for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josnaji. Then I go to the third group, Southeast Asia group. May I ask rapporteur of this group to share the conclusions of this group? Who is the rapporteur of third group? Anybody can volunteer from this group? Southeast Asia group.
If there is none there, I can just read it, if because I can see a lot of points made in the Jamboard.
Yeah, okay.
So there are points for the youth of Myanmar, might need assistance in terms of mental health support, post challenges they face in their country. It is very important to address what they feel and how to engage them in the youth development. Foreign powers should stop providing arms to the regime and to other support to return to democracy. Suggestion recommendations for Afghanistan: put pressure to restore human rights, especially women's rights. Taliban wants recognition and funds. Should get these only by restoring democracy. Strengthening capacity building in terms of rule of law, crime prevention, criminal justice, democracy and human rights, not to limit for young generation, but need engagement to share the expertise. That's from Southeast Asia.
Okay, then let's go to the last group, the Central and Northeast Asia group. Who is rapporteur of this group? Could you please, unmute yourself and share the conclusions? Okay, Joyushin, welcome.
Yeah. Hi, I'm yeah. So from the group number 4, we discussed about the solidarity is important, because in times of crisis it may be difficult for individual countries to solve a problem alone. So solidarity is critical. We should support the space of civil society to be secured. It would be better to start and gradually expand even a small part of a government-civil society partnership, and the government and civil society can mutually agree on. In this process, donor countries and civil societies should support this establishment of partner countries, government, civil society partnership. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Jayu. If there is no speaker from group 1, Josna, I think you can share. Josna?
For sure. Thank you so much. I see again in group 1, there are many suggestions. So I will try to read what is there. It says UN and international organizations should provide humanitarian support and monitor the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. Capacity building, extensive capacity building to movements working with Myanmar, Afghanistan on how to use human rights mechanism. Special rapporteur on Human Rights Council, mandate holder, etc. Knowledge, tools, and resources, gather evidences and documentation on the human rights violations happening in Myanmar and Afghanistan. I see a new one is added, is donor agencies, both bilateral and multilateral, should collaborate regarding conditionality. CSOs should have voices in the process. There should be sufficient, fresh, reliable, and disaggregated data, I think, in the country to monitor the progress of the SDG 16+. Member states should increase finance to enhance peace, human rights, democracy, and governance. Strengthen capacity building in terms of the rule of law, crime prevention, criminal justice, democracy, and human rights, not to limit for young generation, but need multi-stakeholder engagement to share their expertise. And then UN resident country office to enhance communication with the UN regional office to offer support to any such issues. So these are some of the points, good points that were added. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josnaji. Thank you so much, all the friends who have actively participated in your group exercise. You have also, provided very good suggestions and recommendations and the concrete action points to improve the situation of peace, security, justice, good governance in our region. I think we have to go to another, move forward. The action will be to read out our draft statement. Friends, we have been continuously here, and we have been continuously listening from the different distinguished persons, and we have prepared a draft statement on the basis of the conclusions of discussion today. I'm going to read out. Josna, can I go to read?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Josna, do I need to read the preamble or just go to directly to the
Maybe just directly to the program, to the points, and then We'll share the paper and everything with everyone.
Can I share? Okay.
Just share the statement, Dayaji, not preamble at this point of time. Is it okay?
I'll share the screen.
Sure.
And then I'll read out, okay? Do I need to read the preamble or direct go to recommendation to save the time?
Read directly to the recommendation, Dayaji.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have pointed out some recommendations. Okay, the call on the Taliban authority, respect universal human rights and humanitarian policies, humanitarian principle, and to take immediate action to protect the lives of the Afghan people, particularly of women and girls, children, persons with disability, elderly people, displaced peoples, minorities, poor and working class peoples, and the migrant workers on the minimum humanitarian grounds. Create enabling environment for the human rights, freedom and liberty of the people, and also to open space for media and the CSOs to freely run their activities. And the next, call on to the United Nations and the international communities, Afghanistan specific, increase support for emergency evacuation, relocation, and resettlement operation for the Afghan, particularly vulnerable and deserving peoples. Give asylum to those who are at the risk and living in Afghanistan, and this process should speed up. Myanmar specific, we urge all UN members to pressure the present junta regime to immediately cease all violence, stop the killings, tortures, and the arrest, and reinstate an elected government now formed as the National Unity Government as the legitimate government of Myanmar. The United Nations General Assembly and the United Nations Human Rights Commission should urge the Security Council to consider all of the options it has previously used to deal with gross human rights violation, including economic and financial sanctions, arms embargoes, and the tribal bans, and calling for judicial action at the international criminal courts or ad hoc tribunals, apart from denying recognition of the military junta as the legitimate government representing the people of Myanmar, precisely because they are not. The international media should listen to and broadcast the voices of the people in any crisis. There are many different views. So solidarity and recognize and support the agency of the Myanmar people at this time. More engagement and the protest leaders and the other legitimate Myanmar voices to understand their views and to know what support and solidarity measures could be most useful, as well as financial support to the independent media who are reporting under risks to their safety and lives from Myanmar. General recommendation, United Nations General Assembly and other United Nations bodies must refuse the application by the military or any non-inclusive government to recognize or the government representative, and must recognize the NUG as an international government. The United Nations and the member states should apply sanction on the country, remove any preferential trading and arrangements, and cease commercial operations. Call on to the CSOs, mobilize their agencies and mechanisms to relief work for people in the distress, provide adequate humanitarian assistance and the basic necessities with psychosocial support, the most vulnerable as emergency supports, continue international cooperation, particularly in health, education, social security, and sustainable livelihood. All donors and the aid agencies to adhere to the grand bargain commitment in promoting localization and transparency in humanitarian aid, increase humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan and its neighboring countries to which Afghans and fleeing, place new support for civil society groups inside and outside of the Afghanistan for humanitarian support and to protect rights of the people from Afghan and Myanmar, create an independent and gender-sensitive, investigative and accountable mechanism at the United Nations Human Rights Council. We urge the United Nations Security Council to pass a resolution to protect Afghan and the Myanmar women, girls, and minorities. We strongly condemn and violence against the peaceful protesters and call for utmost restraint by the current regimes in Afghanistan and Myanmar to uphold democratic institutions and processes, and call for immediate release and detain government leaders. We call on for massive stepping of humanitarian aid to the people of Myanmar and Afghanistan, and political action to protect the human rights and civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights of the people of Myanmar. The rule of law, the democratic process, and human rights must be upheld. Thank you so much for listening. This is just the draft statement. Definitely, Asia Development Alliance will share this draft to you, and we'll have a lot of chance or opportunities to give our inputs and suggestions in draft. The time is running out, so that I don't want to take much time. Thank you so much for all the colleagues who are here and actively participating in our deliberations. And we go to the, finally we go to the closing session. In closing session, to give the closing remarks, may I invite to Jamola Asakoba. She is from Asia Development Alliance. She is co-chair of Asia Development Alliance and director of ARGO Kazakhstan. May I invite to Jamila to give your closing remarks?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes. Distinguished speakers, participants, and the facilitators of the sessions, thank you for your great deliberations. We salute the courage of Afghan and the Myanmar people for their courage, and especially the women, to come up of the streets to protest. Some of the important points that was discussed in the previous sessions were: Goal 16 is the weakest among all the goals. We missed the fourth pillar, is political one, a part of social, economic, and the environment. Today, authoritarian regimes from east to west, which are using the language of democracy with a shrinking space for civil society, Philippines to India. But remarkable people's power challenging draconian laws, example, Hong Kong. Historic moment for all of us to move ahead in the wake of challenges of Universal Declaration of Human Rights that needs to be kept at center. Now, how do we ensure a sustainable future? Rebuild democracy, huge trust in representative democracy, ensure citizens' dialogue. Human rights discourse out of the clutches of technocrats' language, it's critical, and the hard work in the partial society, not by lawyers and the corridors of UN. Asia is only region where there is no human rights system as accountability the governments. All political detainees should be released. The Kathmandu junta should respect the election. The next one, restore peace and the democracy in Afghanistan. It's time civil society should be put pressure on governments and the business, just as with South Africa before 1993. Governments and the business were reluctant to cut their ties with the apartheid government, but it was popular pressure which forced them to do so. If strong popular moments in ASEAN countries, but pressure on their governments to support the people of Myanmar and on business that invest in them, it would be a good start. Ongoing capacity building with different stakeholders, especially to educate communities at the grassroots level, including the young people, should be strengthened, and the involvement of experts, especially relates to the rule of law, crime prevention, criminal justice, democracy, and the human rights before we speak about bigger issues related to SDG 16. SDG 16 would be the best framework to set the agenda right for capacity building to address human rights, criminal justice, and the upholding rule of law. This could also be essential of training content to empower the grassroots communities. We will put all these points in the draft statement and share with you for your final inputs before sharing with the global and the regional institutions. Last and not least, I'm on behalf of the Asian Development Alliance Steering Committee, want to thank the Global People Assembly for accommodating this first SDG Plus forum. We also want to thank Foros and the TAP networks for your constant support. Finally, we want to thank NASA UD for their technical support. Our gratitude to other members, partners, and all the audience for your active involvement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamila. I think we have to take one photo. One, stay for a few seconds, and just like can we take one photo of here who are present here?
Absolutely.
Just please.
Those who survived the 3 hours, yeah.
Please feel free to open your camera.
We are all SDG 16+ survivors, so.
This is the evidence, you know, we can stay patiently for 3 hours.
Yes. Do you want me to
please, Krishna Neopane and other friends, please open your camera.
Sir, my camera is not working.
Okay,
Sorry.
and Sita Acharya, Dipti, Padmini, Antoine, Martina, please open your camera. Just now, can you open your camera? Okay. Hirenji.
We had
Sarah,
over 80 participants actually during the sessions. Yeah. 80, yeah.
Aftab.
Huge interest.
I'm trying to get my camera to work there.
Padmini.
Hey, Sarah. Yes, we want to see.
Sitaji.
It was an amazing session.
Sarah, thank you so much.
Amazing.
Who is good at taking pictures?
Just now I'm taking picture, but some of our friends, you know, they have not opened their camera.
Okay. Can we do this with the Myanmar? I don't know if my hand.
Solidarity
with Myanmar.
Yeah.
Sarah is coming. Yes, Sarah. Yes.
Yeah, Sarah, great.
Hi.
Done.
Josna, is there any final announcement from your side?
No, I'm just saying thank you so much. Let's meeting. You click the picture there,
yeah.
Ji?
Yeah, I already taken pictures.
Okay, you didn't tell us. We kept posing.
we are meeting after a long time, you know. We can open, you know, this Zoom, and we can interact informally. We have already over our
pausing the recording,
and can discuss, you know, bilaterally or multilaterally. We can discuss, talk with each